Okay, so just a quick introduction who I am. I'm Sally Miller. I am, no wait. I am currently a MedCap Innovation Fellow doing research into accessing farmland and getting new farmers onto farmland. And my background is about 20 years of working in co-op development and food and agriculture and with not-for-profits in mostly food and agriculture issues. So my place in this panel is actually talking about some of the results of my research as a way of thinking about what we should be investing in. So we're looking at, investing in food farms as a food and farms and fertility matters. What I learned from the farmers was actually to think of possible new things that we actually need to think about investing in. So not only developing farmland investment, but actually thinking of new models of farming. And I was getting this from the farmers, so I think there's a real sort of momentum in the countryside to do things slightly differently. As I was going to tell two jokes, and Christy already told one of them, but as Christy said, one of the farmers over and over again told me these two jokes, so I think they're very significant, and one of them is sort of a truism. They said, of course you know that farmers live poor and die rich. And that's actually all about how they see the value of their land. So, next slide. So, as Christy said, we're in a serious crisis at this point if we actually want to be getting food. Farmers can't afford to farm without high debt loads. Because of the high debt loads, the farmer's land becomes the only way they can retire, by selling that land. And seeking to retire, as anybody else does when they come to retirement, as we've been taught to think is the right thing to do, we think about the highest value we could get for our property. So urban homeowners do this, why shouldn't farmers be able to do it? So they want to sell it for the highest value. Of course, the highest value is not farmland, it's development. So this crisis is exacerbated in Canada. I'm originally from the US, so this always stuns me. This is the small bit is the map of where the best farmland, or even the farmable farmland, is in Canada. The red is class 1, which is the prime farmland. 50% of it is in southern Ontario, which is where I was doing my research, and then there's bits of it scattered over here. And the other map is Ontario itself, and this is sort of the breakdown of the class 1 farmland in there. The problem is that a lot of the class 1 farmland is around urban areas. That's true across North America. And urban areas, of course, are exactly where we're losing it to development. So, so the next slide. So the other thing that is going on, of course, is that when I interviewed Ann Slater from the National Farmers Union, she said, well, the problem isn't really that we're losing farmland, we're losing farmers. And the situation that you've been hearing about all weekend, it's becoming harder and harder to farm and more of a crisis. And it's hard, I think, to expect farmers to want to keep farming, to ask people to go into a career which is so difficult, and where they can look back at the last 30 years and know that they're making the same money they were making in the 1970s. So we need to fix that formula. So this is our loss of farmers in Ontario over the 80 years there. Then the next one, as I said, we're losing farmland. This is actually a photo from FarmStart, which is the incubation farm that Christy Young is ED of FarmStart. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing in southern Ontario, where you're seeing these subdivisions coming up. Very expensive and inefficient way to develop housing, not dense at all. And then we have this precious farm in the middle. You see it from above, it's even more sort of striking because there's houses all around and then this amazing farm thing in the middle. So next slide. So one of the things that is going on, which is an incredible opportunity for us and exciting, but it's also a very complicated transition which we need to figure out how to navigate, is that the direct marketing, farm gates, CSAs, all of that is on the rise. Just farmers markets alone are estimated at over $3 billion right now. But a lot of what's happening right now is that I could see when I was interviewing people that there is a real shift in the way people are interested in farming. So we're looking at succession issues. We're not having a sort of standard type of succession where the next farming generation are the young people who grew up on the farm and are taking it over. There's a large group of farmers interested in growing food, which we clearly need to do. Obviously, we need to move towards regional food systems. But they're not people who grew up on the farm. So we're talking about a different kind of succession and transfer. And even for the young people who did grow up on the farm and then are taking it over from their parents, it's become a very different proposition. So I talked to one farmer who said his grandfather gave the farm to his father, willed it to him. He inherited it. That was great. His father then, when it came to Brian's time to move onto his land, his father couldn't afford to just give it to him in the will. So he actually arranged for another piece of property. He got a quarter crop mortgage, which is a very nice kind of mortgage you can't get anymore, which is where your mortgage payment is based on your crop production. Makes sense. And then so he gradually bought it off from his father. And now we're looking at farms that are so large that the sons and daughters can't mobilize that kind of capital that early in their career. In fact, they'd be insane to go into farming with that kind of debt to buy it from their fathers. So we need a new kind of succession. So I'm going to read one thing from Raj Patel, the great food activist and writer, who has said recently in the book called The Value of Nothing, "One thing is clear, the thinking that got us into this mess is unlikely to rescue us." So we need new thinking. So next slide. So as I said, there are new farmers. These are shots of farmers that are coming from farm start trainings and workshops. These are people who are interested in farming. They are interested in participating in regional food systems. We need them to be able to get onto land. At this point, they have various ways of doing it, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the next slide. And as I said, there is still intergenerational transfer going on, but they still face the same challenges of raising the capital. So I think it's sort of one of the things we've realized from this research is that there's, in no case is succession easy. 75% of Canadian farmers will be retiring or reaching retirement age in the next 10 years. Would probably like to retire. So succession is a very large and increasingly important issue that we need to address. And the next one, I've mentioned this. PowerPoint's eating my slide here. But as I said, one of the things that's been happening because of planning and government approaches to farming has been to move farms towards larger and larger, more and more consolidated farms. Right now in Ontario, it's almost impossible to find land that's under 100 acres because of the planning rules that have been put in have constrained any severance beyond 100 acres. Now, if you're a young farmer who's decided to farm for food rather than commodities, you're going into business, it's insane. You don't need 100 acres to start. You need more like 25 or 30, but you want access to you want a possibility, at least to own or something, on the larger part as you grow, right? So you wouldn't want the kind of debt you'd have to buy one of those 100-acre parcels. What you do want is to be close to the markets, which is why the development taking over farmland becomes more and more of a problem. So what we're seeing are these, and Ontario farms are not that big, of course, compared to other farms in Canada, but they are, the average now in the latest census of agriculture is 800 acres, and there are many that are thousands. So they're sort of, and what I'm arguing is that they're becoming too big to transfer. And transfer, I think one of the things that's important to think about is that succession is a very difficult issue. It's something that Christy said to me once, is it's about, let's see if I can get this, relationships and dreams and aspirations, as well as hard facts about properties and assets. So we're asking these farmers, and because they have so many assets and they have so much debt, it's a very tricky estate, it's very complicated, and we're asking them in their 50s to start thinking ahead, because if they pass away without having figured out how to transfer the farm, it probably won't go to farmland. So, and that means they have to think about their mortality. It means they have to talk to their sons and daughters who may have watched them work for years with never having a vacation and working into the wee hours of the morning, and maybe they don't really want to farm, so they have to finally say to their daughter, you know, do you want to do this? You know, and get the answer. So it's a very emotionally difficult issue. So this is one of the graduates from Farm Start, right? She started Farm Start, and then she was also manager at Everdale, which also trains new farmers. And one of the things that's happening, you saw that those two photos of the groups of young farmers. They are going through these trainings together, and it's 4 or 5 years, but sometimes longer. They often end up interning on some different farms, and it's a very, very complete, and they are excellent business people, as Christy said, by the time they are ready to have their own farm. One of the results, though, of this sort of incredible training that they're getting to go through is that they've learned to work together, and they actually very much see a value in being able to create cooperative farms. And a lot of them said to me when I interviewed them that they would like to be able to be in a community farm, maybe with a couple of the other people that they've known for so long and gone through this training with, you know, I mean, they trust them at this point. They'd like to be able to buy it together and live there together. One person who likes sheep can do the livestock, and somebody else who's more into carrots and lettuce can do the vegetables. The problem is that in Ontario, and as far as I know, in Canada, throughout Canada, we have this problem. We can't put multiple residences on these parcels. So you have the 100-acre parcels, you can't divide them anymore, according to the planning rules. So if you could divide them, you could divide them into 4 and put a house on each one, which would be inefficient for infrastructure, but you could do it. But if you have a 100-acre parcel and you buy it with 4 of your friends, only one of you is allowed to live there. So there's an opportunity for these people to work together, distribute, transport, marketing, all that stuff, which is so difficult when the markets are all sort of in, or they centralize in these urban areas, and they can't, because of the way the land structure is set up, they can't do it. Next one. This is just to mention another issue that's going on, because a lot of the farmers are talking about it, and this is the green belt. So it's a protected agricultural area, and it's created a lot of anger among the farmers who were hoping to sell for development, and it's also protected some very important agricultural areas, like the Holland Marsh, which was on the very first photo. Zoning is often talked about as one way of protecting agricultural areas for farmland. But I think the problem is that we have gone for so many decades now moving towards large-scale farms with one owner that there's a whole bunch of things that we need to sort of claw back in order to make this work. A lot of people that I interviewed actually said to me, well, you're going to give me a solution, right? I'm retiring in 10 years. You tell me what to do. And I said, you know, it's not. This is the problem. It's taken us decades to get into this mess, and there is now no magic bullet, no single solution which is going to solve it all. However, we're not alone. There is some very important work particularly with Via Campesina, but with peasant movements around the world, fighting back to get people who want to grow food back on the land. This is a picture of Ekta Tereshad's recent march. 50,000 people, 50,000 landless peasants in India marched to Delhi demanding land for food. And they won. And they partway through, they actually decided to call off the march because the ministers got together and signed some things saying some fair amount of detail saying that they were going to go ahead with land reform. So, next. So, solutions. I did see solutions out there as I was talking to people. As I said, I see it as a work that we need to get behind in a bunch of different ways: policy, law, planning, as well as the financing that we're talking about here. I also saw one of the things going on is that there's both short-term and long-term solutions, and I think I've been hearing that a lot this weekend. So there's all the young farmers that are in fact getting land, and they have ways of doing it, and we can support that kind of thing. I think we also need to think of larger changes, which is going to make it easier for people to capitalize. So next one. Sorry. So this is another picture of FarmStart where you can see all the different plots, and Christy can talk more about how this works, but to me this is an absolutely extraordinary model. You've got people start, the explorers, their first stage, they start with a quarter acre. They can find out how they feel about it. They get some training from more established farmers. And then they can move up to 4 acres is the maximum. And they're there for 4 to 5 years. So by the time they're done, and this is McBean Farm, which is actually on public land, right? It's here. So it's extraordinary already because it's a very interesting use of near urban land. By the time they've gotten through those 4 or 5 years, they have a business. They usually have a branded business that people know and love, and kind of want to follow them anywhere. And then they're at the stage when they would like to get their own land. And this is the one where we're seeing some stumbling and some roadblocks, right? Next slide. There's also this is Mapleton's Organic, which is an organic dairy that's been around for decades in Ontario. And what's interesting is that there's some informal examples now going on of these older farmers who are giving some acreage to, giving or sometimes renting, but I think a lot of it's been giving, small piece of acreage to a new farmer to build their CSA, get used to the work, and have the senior farmer there helping them out. I'm saying informal because these aren't managed. It's not something that's sort of under a program. It tends to be something where the senior farmer says, "I've got 5 acres. Somebody want to come and use it?" So we could get much more out of this as a way of building new farmers. Next one. Then again, as I mentioned, the other thing I'm seeing, this is Caitlin Hall, who at Reroot Farm, who was actually the first person who incubated on Mapleton's from the previous slide. She now has her own land. She had to do it with a down payment support from her parents, which is how this is happening, which means that people who don't have that kind of family asset are excluded from getting onto land, right? The other thing that's interesting about this is that she is doing the seedlings. She has a greenhouse. She's doing the seedlings for a bunch of the other young farmers who are in the area, and even one that's a couple hours away. So this is an example of the cooperation. If it was something that we recognized that farmers do, and farmers always do this, right? It's not just these new sustainable farmers. But if we recognized how important that cooperation and exchange in the countryside is, I think we would look at different models that we would be trying to invest in to protect agriculture. It's actually one of the things that came out of my research that the farmers talked about the most was how, and this was conventional, established, older farmers, young conventional farmers, sustainable farmers, older sustainable farmers, all of them, it was so crucial to them to be in an agricultural community. When they talk about their success, they talk about the support they've had from other farmers. One of them talked about flipping a machine in her her field. She was only been farming for a couple of years, and the guy next door came and with a bigger machine and turned it back upright, and that kind of thing. And the young farmers are finding themselves quite, accepted in a way. She said, I think they think I'm nuts, but they can see I work hard, and that's all they really care about. So I think one of the most telling things that somebody told me was how disturbing it is when you look at Barrie in Ontario as a town that's one of the fastest, sprawling communities, subdivisions taking over all over the place. South of Barrie is Farmland, which goes down through several towns. Eventually south gets to Innisfil, and then if you keep going, you get to Toronto. So they recently approved housing development in Innisfil, which is all farmland, so that's tragic in itself. But what it does is that it isolates a band of good farmland between Barrie and Innisfil. And the research all over North America has shown that that's gone. We might as well just write that off right now, because the farmers, the infrastructure starts to break down, the agricultural supply leaves, the large vets leave, they can't get processing anymore. They've got all these people who are not farmers who are complaining about the noise and the dust and the smell, and they leave. On top of that, they're faced with developers who are offering them great prices for their land. So they've lost their agricultural community, and they move. So I think we actually need to look at investments in farmland as far in sort of larger community, not just getting the farmers on the land, but thinking about what we're trying to create to make farming for food really work. Am I done? Okay. So that's another example, a very interesting example of farming on public land in exchange for giving education. He's not paying for the land. Go ahead. This is a community farm, which Rick is going to talk about, so I won't go into, but an extraordinary model which hasn't really been tried yet in other places. Land trusts, which are a way of paying the farmer to keep and paying the farmer for the land, but keeping the land agricultural. There's some challenges with it, partly because farmers want to get the full value of their land, and they also are resistant, at least in Ontario, to having any other regulations about their land whatsoever, because they're really tired of it. And so one of the things that I'd like to argue, and I'll finish off with this, is to think about the fact that farming, and to me this applies to all methods of most of the farmers I've ever talked to, they're thinking in terms of long-term relationship to their land. Now, Christy's right, their markets have become short-term, they're struggling with short-term capitalization and things like that, but that's one of the problems. I think we need to think of long-term economic vehicles and solutions for them that fit the kind of thing that goes on in farming. So more sort of agroecological thinking for financing. Okay? So think like a mountain, as Leopold said once. So my last, and I would like to finish. I would like to finish with, I talked to a farmer, one farmer that I know pretty well, and he had a terrible year. His greenhouse was wiped out, all his crops were wiped out, drowned. This was the year before the drought. And he had nothing to sell until September, when they started to have a little bit of stuff. And I said, how do you do this? Like, how do you just like not break down and go work for the post office or something? And he said, well, it only happens every 1 in 3 years, and I feel like that's pretty good. So, patience is what I'm arguing is what we need in financing, and I will close there. Thank you.